Anyways, I took the beret off his head. I walked off about 5 feet, and he was like, "Hey, hey, man!" And I turned around and I zinged it at him like a frisbee. And hit him in his chest. And he was like, "Hey, young man, you better mellow out," that kind of thing. At any rate, elevator doors opened and I walked out. And then at the cocktail party, I was partying at the bar across the street. I went over there with a bunch of people from the bar scene, and somehow me and Jim Brown's paths crossed, and I ended up taking his beret off of his head. I was a young wild man.
Okay, you got pause there. How did you? What? Tell us that. That's a great.
He just had a swagger to himself and the whole 9 yards. And anyways, I took the beret off his head. I walked off about 5 feet, and he was like, "Hey, hey, man!" And I turned around and I zinged it at him like a frisbee. And hit him in his chest, and he was like, "Hey, young man, you better mellow out," that kind of thing. At any rate, I came back home, and the guy that was my pseudo manager at the time, phone contact, their lines went dead, and they pretty much, he finally got the guy back on the line. He said, "Hey, what's going on? When are we going to get set up and the travel for the next show?" And he goes, "That guy's fucking crazy. He's never, because that guy's never coming in the show." He goes, "He tried to fight everybody. He's a nut." And perhaps I was in those days, but
well, after
How did you get
hearing that
kicked-
story,
how
I
did-
agree with it.
How did you get kicked out?
yeah, I got kicked out before I was even in it. And so weird twists and turns. And this ties into professional wrestling a bit. I was quite depressed because that was my key out of where I was in life. And I don't know if it's narcissistic thoughts or textbook anyways, but I was not meant to work a 9 to 5. And so I was kind of like, "Oh man, you screwed up your only path out of normalcy here to be something that you are." And I was depressed. And so these guys I was training with, I went over to their apartment and they're like, "All right, we're going to the gym. We're going to bang it out." And we were not knowing how to fight, but we would go in and fight in an empty wrestling room as much as your friends would allow you to beat up on them. And so I go, "No, man, I got kicked out." And I go, "What do you want to do?" I go, "Well, let's just go have a drink." So we went to a dive bar, and I didn't want to go. I wouldn't have gone normally, but not that it was a dive bar. I just didn't like where it was, the people and everything. Anyway, so we go in there. It was like a bikini bar, and sooner or later, my friend says, "Anybody messes with you, I'll take care of them." And so, of course, somebody messes with me, and he's pushing in the guy's face, and this guy's wrestled at Nebraska, was an All-American. And I'm like, "Oh, here we go again." It was, it was an everyday occurrence. And his girlfriend come running up, and he foot swept her. And so I went, him and the guy and my friend started pushing each other. I went in to pull him off before it escalated into something bad. And I'm pulling him back, and I hear this huge crack and a light flash. Like, what the fuck was that? I turn around and some guy's holding a broken pool cue. And instantly I said, oh, that's what it was. And he was kind of like, how come this guy isn't falling down? And I snatched him up and made short workout and work over him. And so the owner ends up knowing the guy through drugs or what have you, buying them, selling them, knowing the guy that I was working for at the cut and sew medical company, the guy that got me into the UFC. That's how small of a world. That's why I think it's all written. And he calls up my friend and says, hey, I got this guy on tape hurting this guy really bad. And if he doesn't give me some money, that tape's going to be given to the cops. And so like, oh my God, I just got out of this. It's called Camp Snoopy. It's like an honor farm thing. I just got out of Camp Snoopy. And now I got a crime on tape that could send me to the big house. And this guy's extorting me for $1,000. And I had to mull it over like, what the hell am I going to do? And so $1,000 back in that day, well, might as well have been 100,000.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, I had to pay this guy. So I go get the money out of the bank. I go to the bar and walk in there. And I swear to you, it's central casting. Some little wormy, long-haired guy with those Vans slip-on shoes with the black and white flag type thing comes walking out and says, hey man. I'm like, oh my God, this is not happening. Tells me about all his cameras and he's pointing them out to me and everything. And then he takes me outside and he says, see this? Because I had enough wits about me to carry this guy out the front door. And he's like, I took that one down and there was a post hanging off the wall. He goes, so the cops don't know about it, but I have the tape of what you did to him out here. I'm like, oh, this is just, it was just like quicksand. It was getting deeper and deeper. Next thing I know, I'm like, okay, all right. So then he goes, why don't you tell me, after I give him the envelope, he goes, why don't you tell me something? I don't understand this. He goes, everybody I get to bounce here, everybody comes in here is terrified of you. And he goes, I don't get it. He goes, it's not like you're some huge dude and the whole 9 yards. And I go, oh, I keep saying 9 yards, but anyways, so the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, I go, that's just the way it is. I go, I've been around these towns for a while and I take care of business. And he's like, yeah, I just don't get it. And he goes, well, you ever thought about professional wrestling? And at that point in time, I was not even remotely, I had exposure to it. And I did not like it, but I was not something I ever thought I'd do. And I'm like, but I wasn't in the position to have anything negative towards this guy that just extorted me. I didn't want to fan the embers or anything.
Right.
So I go, yeah, well, you know, whatever comes your way, comes your way. And he's well, let me tell you something. I have a friend who is a agent for professional wrestling. And I'm like, yeah, and he goes, he can get you into professional wrestling. And he goes, and if he does, then we can, you know, split the money, or, you know, I can represent you. The guy's a shill or a money grubber kind of guy, trying to make a huckster, trying to make a buck. And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, you know, not thinking anything of it. And he's all, no, I'm telling you, this guy's a big guy. He's brought this guy into my bar. I wish I remembered the guy's name. It was some big wrestler name at the time. He brought him into the bar and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, whatever, you know. And he goes, well, how do I get a hold of you? And I go, it was back in the day at pagers. And I go, you can give me a page, or you can call my buddy who you had call me to tell me you have the tape. He can get a hold of me. And so at the time, I was peddling garage doors, sectional garage doors for a buddy, just to make alcohol money. And so I was sitting in his office, and the pager goes off, and I go, what does he want now? And the guy that was calling the UFC, and it got me in, and then I go, well, I don't know. So I call him up, and he goes, and I'm kind of pissed off at him because his friend was the bar owner, and God knows what they were selling and buying from each other. So I was kind of pissed off. What do you want now? Kind of thing. He goes, hey, Brad wants to meet you at a restaurant. And he goes, you know where this is? You know, it was like a Fridays or something like that. He goes, I'm like, yeah. And he goes, well, he wants to meet you there. And I'm like, yeah. And I go, he goes, call him. So I called him up. And he says, hey, kid, you remember me? And he goes, remember that guy I was telling you about, the agent? He goes, he wants to meet you at a restaurant. It was around noonish, breakfast type, late breakfast kind of thing. And I'm all, yeah. And he goes, can you meet me here? And I go, yeah, I can be there in 20 minutes. He goes, okay, I'll meet you there. So we go there, and once again, central casting, this guy pulls up in a 560 red SL. Back in the day, it was brand new. It was like, what the hell was it? Was it 94, 95-ish? And we go in there, and we go to meet, and he's talking to me, and, you know, he's telling me the gig, and I'm not polished about anything, just telling him who I was and what I could do, and et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, well, if I get you in this, you got to go back east and learn how to wrestle and go around and do all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, there's no fucking way am I going to go back to the East Coast and be there and do all that kind of stuff and live in an apartment. But I was not in the position to go, fuck, no, I ain't doing that. Are you fucking crazy? I'm like, oh, okay. And so we had this conversation over lunch / breakfast lunch. And then he goes, so you want to be a wrestler there, huh, kid? And he had like slick black back, brown hair, and like almost greased back. He was a short, fat little dude, wire rimmed glasses. He looked like Bruce Pritchard when he was the, what was the
Brother Love.
Brother Love.
Yeah.
He resembled that, yes.
Yeah.
And trust me, I later came across Brother Love and all that. But I'm like, I'm going, yeah, sure. And then so we're at the close, and I go, well, and I find it hard to be a slickster and a liar and not speak the truth. And I go, well, to be honest with you, you know, and if it wasn't meant to be, I would have shot myself in the fucking foot. But I go, I'm not too keen on really wanting to be a professional wrestler. And he's like, yeah. And I go, well, my my dream, my whole existence is fighting. And I go, that's all I do, man. I go to boxing gyms, I go to wrestling rooms, and I go out every night, and there's always a fool that thinks he can kick my ass, and I like to fuck them up. And he's like, yeah. And I go, yeah. And I go, I wanted to get in this UFC. You know, that thing they have on TV, the real stuff. I go, I didn't think it was real till that guy's tooth went flying out of his mouth. And I said, oh, fuck, I need to do this. And he goes, ha, 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 kid. He goes, you want to do that? I'm telling you, it's movie stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do it. And he's all, I can get you in that fucking mom and pop show. I'm paraphrasing it. And you know, he goes, I can get you in that, no problem. And he goes, you want to go have a drink? And I'm not a stranger. Obviously, I have a liver and a kidney transplant for a reason. I go, sure, I can go have a cocktail. And he goes, okay. And we were in Garden Grove, which is adjacent to Huntington Beach. And he goes, do you know where a bar is on this street? And I go, yeah, I know where it is. He goes, I'll meet you there. We'll have some drinks and talk. So I'm thinking to myself, what the hell? And so I get in my truck, and a little mid-sized truck, Sonoma type thing. I drive over there. Next thing I know, we're all sitting around having drinks, and he's talking to me. It turns out this guy used to own a coin operated business back in those days with the video games and all that kind of stuff. So he knew all the bar owners and all the people. And so he was whipping out his keys and opening the machines up, and we're drinking. And I'm like, not knowing who this guy is and being a babe to the world at that time, I was like, wow, this guy's a mover and a shaker and the whole 9 yards, buying into the whole thing. And so he's sitting down and he says to me, hey kid, you want to be in that fighting show? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I can get you in that show, no problem. And I go, yeah. I go, well, what do you want to do? And he goes, give me some time. He goes, first of all, I'm going to ask you seriously. He goes, those guys are black belts and trained killers and fighters. You sure you want to do this? And I go, absolutely. And he walks outside and he gets in his SL red convertible, and he pulls out a brick out of his glove compartment with an antenna on it. And it was one of those old cell phone things.
Those did look like bricks too.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm looking out the window going, holy smokes, what the hell is that? I go, this is like the movies. This is a Charlie's Angels thing, you know? And he's out there on the phone. I'm like, going, is he? Because he said, let me go get on the phone. He was obviously putting on a show for me. And I'm like watching it through the windows, and then he comes back in and he goes, all right, kid, you're in.
Wow.
And I go, no, there's no way I can be in. And I go, I'll tell you what happened. I just did. I told you guys. And I go, they're not going to let me in. He goes, that's all taken care of. He goes, you got 3 Jew boys and an Irishman running that fucking shop. And I'm like, I got to pinch myself, man. This is the movies. And I'm like, okay. And I had the wherewithal and limited wits that I do have. And I go, what do you want from me? He goes, I don't want anything from you, kid. And he goes, they're making like $50,000, $60,000 if you win the show. He goes, that's pissant money. He goes, keep it, that's yours. He goes, but you're gonna get your ass kicked. He goes, when it comes to making the real money in wrestling, he goes, then we're gonna talk. And he goes, and I want you to give me first, crack. And I said, well, that's fine. I go, as long as you don't want anything, we're all good. He goes, no, just don't get hurt too bad.
So you're thinking, this guy's $50,000 in piss money. You're thinking that's the most money I've ever been around in my life.
Hell yeah, man! I was like, I'm never gonna have to work again. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
And so it goes on, and then 2 or 3 days later, the guy that was the cut and sew, the mouthpiece on the phone friend that got me into boxing, calls me up and goes, "You're not gonna believe this." And I'm all, what? He goes, a FedEx came and there's a contract in there for the UFC. And I go, you gotta be fucking kidding me. I go, I'm coming down there right now to sign it. We're gonna send that fucker right back. And he goes, yeah, man. He goes, what did you do? How did this happen? I go, it's too hard to explain. I can't tell you. And so they all thought I was going to get my ass kicked, and I was going to be just like the boxing gym. I was going to be the stooge to show the whole world what happens to street fighters against these skilled martial artists and their skills of boxing and all that. And the first fight, I think, was 19 or 26 seconds against a 400-pound Samoan guy. It's kind of famous because he did all these convulsing on the floor. And he's with his arms all stuck out, and they're like going, oh my God, this guy just made short work of this guy. Not only did he do that, he did it in devastating fashion. And I wasn't into the respect and all martial arts. And like I said, I was a young man full of vinegar and piss. And I was like, okay. So I saw him flopping on the floor, which I've seen many, many, many times before. And the build up to that fight, it was the first fight, and there was a huge build up to it. And everybody's all running around going, oh, like I had a meeting with the announcers, and Jim Brown couldn't put together where he knew who I was. And he was looking at me, and he goes, you got like a big mouth and you're kind of cocky and you're all that. And I go, well, you don't remember, do you? And he's all what? I go, the cocktail party at the last show. He goes, his eyes got all big and he sat back in his chair and he's like, oh. And then he's like, I can't wait for you to fight in this show. Like, oh, this guy's going to get his just desserts, this big smart ass. And I understand exactly because I run into these kind of guys all the time. And I'm like, well, you'll just have to wait and see what happens. So when I knocked out, then it was random with this lottery system that they picked out who fought who. And I was the first fight, and I was the first fight against a 400-pound bone-breaking Samoan. And all these guys from the martial arts world and pretty much just about everywhere do not really understand fighting, especially in the street. Not some fucking skill that you learn and you go practice in a dojo. Like when someone's trying to kill you and you're trying to get to the point where you can kill them, where it's your decision to make. And So they had no clue. And so when I knocked his ass out and he's flopping on the floor, I couldn't help it. It was inside of me. I just had to make fun of him. And so I put my arms out and did a little dance. And then I looked over and I seen them all sitting at the announcer's desk like, oh my God, this guy is really not just saying this. He really is for real. And then the next fight I fought was a 6'8" guy, 300 whatever pounds. But just where, like I said, was where I ended up. I had him pinned up against the fence, and I was stuck there for a little bit. I was thinking, what do I need to do? So I put my knee on his face, and I reached down and I grabbed the fence, and I started pulling down so the pressure would go into his face, and his arms and his legs would start kicking everywhere. And I looked up into the crowd, and guess whose table was right dead set in front of me? Jim Brown and the other two announcers. And they had the biggest look of shock on their face. Like, oh my God, what is this guy doing to this poor guy? And I couldn't help but laugh.